Welcome back, folks, to American Agenda. Justice Clarence Thomas has agreed to temporarily freeze a lower court order requiring the testimony of Republican Senator Lindsey Graham in front of an Atlanta area special grand jury that is investigating efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election in the state. Joining us now to discuss, distinguished professor at Touro University, Thane Rosenbaum. Thane, thank you so much for joining us. Now, I understand the senator's argument is, hey, I'm a member of Congress. I can make phone calls to people. I forget if it was Raffensperger. Yeah, I think it was the Secretary of State. I had a conversation with him about the votes and thought that they could be better for the former president. And he's saying, I have the right to make these kinds of calls in the course of my business. Is that his argument? And I'm assuming, even if it is, it has nothing to do with why this was frozen temporarily.
Right, Bob. His argument is actually even stronger than that. He's saying the Constitution's speech and debate clause grants legislators an immunity from criminal prosecution if they're engaged in the work of legislation. And he's saying, guess what? Senate was about to vote on the Electoral Count Act to certify the presidential elections. I was merely conducting investigations to determine whether or not the vote counts in Georgia are legitimate. I don't want to cast a vote in the Senate unless I can be assured that the Georgia ballots are legitimate. And so the prosecutors are saying, well, that's not all we want to ask you about. We understand you made phone calls to overturn the election. So he filed an action in federal court, because remember, this is a criminal matter in state court. So he went to federal court to try to get protection. The trial court said, well, the only thing we could do for you, Senator, is block questions related to investigation. But if you were asked questions or you said you want to overturn the election, that the prosecutors have a right to know. The 11th Circuit, he appealed to them. They turned him down. And Bob, he frankly is very lucky that Clarence Thomas is in charge of Georgia when it comes to emergency applications. Had it been a different justice, they might not have granted him a relief. So this is a temporary stay. That's all it is until the whole court examines this request.
He may be lucky it was Clarence Thomas, but the former President Trump, he thought he might be lucky when he appealed the documents case to the Supreme Court, and he had no luck there. But when you say until the whole Supreme Court hears, we know that typically the court will hear arguments, and then it'll be months and months before we hear an outcome. Will this be on a faster track than that?
It might be, Bob. At this point, he was supposed to testify, I believe, November 17th. So everything, the prosecution of the president and these investigations will certainly be on hold until such time as the Supreme Court decides whether the immunity of the speech and debate clause of the Constitution applies to Senator Graham. Everything is essentially on hold. There probably is. Remember, this is an emergency application, and the Supreme Court often hears them. Remember, we saw them in connection with the vaccine mandates, right? Those situations when something has to happen quicker. So clearly, the decision by a Supreme Court won't be at the end of the term in June, but surely it'll, until the Supreme Court convenes again, the November 17th testimony is certainly off the table for Senator Graham. At least.
So when you say temporarily, you're talking about this could be a year from now before.
No. I'm sorry if I I
misunderstood.
Yeah, no, I was saying normally. Remember, Supreme Court cases.
Yeah.
Normally, they always show up at the end of June. Literally, the big cases for this term, no matter when they're argued, can't hear the result until I'll be on your show the last week of June.
Exactly.
All the time. But these emergency applications that we've seen with COVID vaccines, the Supreme Court treats them as emergencies and will clearly come to convene and discuss the issues surrounding them, but it won't be until they come together. Right now, all you have is the authority of one justice who put a hold on the decision until they all come together. And I suspect that they will in the coming.
And just because a lot of people still are wondering about this as it unfolds, do you think President Trump will end up testifying in front of the January 6th committee? And if not, why not?
So I think he's going to be taking the position all along that he has been immune from these investigations, and that this is really just the Congress acting outside of its authority and violating the principle of separation of powers, right? Three branches of government, equal powers, not one has more over the other.
Right.
This has to do with my actions as President of the United States, and I'm immune from this. And yes, of course, I would take the Fifth Amendment, but I don't need to, because I don't need to appear, because there was a separation of powers in place at the time that this matter took place for January 6th.
And just so I understand, I think he was asked to appear November 14th and provide documents before that. What argument will he make, and what will happen between now and then so that he doesn't appear?
Well, you know, as you've seen, the president has been busy throughout his entire 4 years in fending off cases. In fact, just today, a jury is convening in New York against the Trump Organization on tax fraud. So the president has lawyers everywhere.
Right.
And he's done a very good job of staying out of the fray and avoiding them. My guess is that he's going to claim that he's immune from this prosecution. This is under the Constitution, violates the separation of powers. And I'm not going to respond until, remember, we've talked about this before, Congress has no prosecutorial.
Right. It's all the DOJ. It has to go to the DOJ. The DOJ has.
They'd have to do the same thing they did with Steve Bannon.
Except Steve Bannon wasn't actually the president of the United States.
Quite right. But Bannon, Meadows, Scavino, and Navarro, he's going to say, my guys didn't participate in these subpoenas. Why should I? I clearly have the executive privilege. They're claiming executive privilege. I was the executive. All of the conversations around January 6th were protected. And if I wanted to talk to my guys about the election, I could say almost anything and be immune from prosecution.
Okay, Thane, I'm going to be late to class tomorrow. I have a podcast I have to appear on. So I hope I can get notes from somebody. Thank you.
You always get a break from me, Bob.
I appreciate it. Thane Roosevelt, thank you. Well, Stanford